In addition to that, there's a medical abuse part as a part of it.
Well, good evening, everybody. So glad that you're joining us tonight for this special conversation, this critical dialogue that we're going to have this evening regarding men's concerns, men's empowerment, men being whole, men fulfilling their rightful place in the kingdom. I think one of the things that's so essential for us to understand tonight is that God has destined men to do something great, something powerful, something wonderful, but it's all about us being properly positioned physically, mentally, and of course, spiritually. So I'm going to ask you to do this tonight. Those of you who are at home with persons, with brothers, know some brothers, have some uncles, some nephews, some fathers, some grandfathers. Can you do me a favor right now? Can you just text them right now, tweet them right now, call them right now, DM them right now, and encourage them to sign on and join us tonight. So we're going to have a powerful conversation regarding some issues concerning men and how we can move beyond where we are and literally take our rightful place in the kingdom, the place that God has established for us, that we can be whole, our families can be whole, our community can be whole, we can accomplish what is the will of God for our lives. So tonight, Lady Carlos has graciously allowed me to come and share tonight. She would normally be in this time slot. I'm sharing with y'all, but she asked me to slide in and to kind of host and guide and represent herself and, of course, the entire Renaissance Center team. And with me tonight are two persons who I feel are experts in their fields. One's a medical doctor. One is a licensed counselor. And both of them, I believe, will bring a wealth of information and knowledge to our conversation tonight. Of course, we have Dr. Reginald Thomas, who also serves as the pastor of the Greater Gethsemane Church in Baltimore, but he has also a licensed counselor. He has so many degrees, I can't even, remember them all, but he has degrees and upon degrees. So he'll be sharing with us tonight. In addition, Dr. Michael Durry, medical doctor, who again brings such strength and wealth of information to our congregation, our community. God has used him in so many different ways to remind persons in general what it means to really take care of their bodies and to make sure you are the best person possible physically. And so tonight, both of them are going to share with me in this conversation. Again, make sure, do me a favor one more time, go and invite somebody, holler at a brother, encourage them throughout your home, your network. They want to be a part of this conversation on this evening because we want to deal with some issues, some concerns that are facing men. And out the gate, I want to open this way. I'm going to ask Dr. Thomas just to share with us in his own way. So as he looks throughout our communities, he looks throughout our world, what are the things that he's seeing that men really need to get a hold of to make sure that we're able to really move forward. Again, I'm going to use this phrase consistent tonight, where we can fulfill our role and our potential in the kingdom. He's going to look at it from a spiritual point of view, mental, emotional point of view. I'm going to ask Dr. Durry to do the same, and then we'll just dive into conversations. Now, also, if you have questions tonight while we're sharing, put them in the chat. Our team will get to them and feed them to us. We'll make sure that it's a conversation shared between our panelists tonight, as well as those persons who are sharing with us on our multiple virtual platforms. So Dr. Thomas, if you can just share with us, what are the things that you're sensing, you're seeing that we need to make sure we get a handle on?
So thank you, Bishop, first of all, for having me. Thank you, Dr. Carla Debnam, as well. And it's so good to be able to share with Dr. Durry as well on this evening. I believe it's important for us, particularly as men of faith, and we can make it even more specific, African-American men of faith, to realize that when we talk about salvation, that the term that we get salvation from in the Greek soter, and the branch of theology that deals with salvation, soteriology, that it really is an umbrella term that not only impacts or touches us in terms of our souls. It's interesting, the word soul in the Greek is the word psyche, which is, the U becomes a Y when we transliterate it into English, so psyche. But that God's concerned about the kind of the wholeness of us. Mm-hmm. And so not just preparing us for heaven, of course that's important, but also concerned about the quality of our lives down here. Having said that, if we take that seriously, then as spiritual beings who are tasked to be good stewards of our bodies, then health is important. Spiritual health, physical health, mental health. Certainly we could bring in there financial health and other aspects of health as well. But what I'm seeing is, I think that it is important for us to kind of broaden how we see ourselves as men of faith, that God really does want us to experience some victory and great health in all of those areas. Additionally, as it relates specifically to mental health, it is absolutely important that we do the best we can to erase or erode the stigma that becomes a barrier to men seeking help. Certainly, and I know Dr. Durry, this is more in his wheelhouse in terms of the physical health piece, so I'll leave that to him to address barriers there. But when it comes to our mental health, our socialization, how we are socialized, is often such a barrier. Mm-hmm. So many of us, we're socialized to think that to seek help means that we're not strong. Wow. That we're less than, that we're weak. And that impacts us seeking help as it relates to our mental health. We think that it's like waving the flag of surrender and admitting that we're not strong, when in reality, seeking help for our mental health has nothing to do with the weak versus strong dynamic. As a matter of fact, I think it takes a whole lot of strength to come to terms with the fact that it's in our best interest to collaborate so that we can become better versions of ourselves. So I do think that for men, it's time to get real, to be honest. And I think that when a few of us start to talk about where we are with it and our own struggles, if we have any with it, or our own, position on it, if we are in favor of it, I think others will start to open up as well. So I see that happening because of a lot of anxiety and depression and substance abuse and all of that. It's just, really positioning us where either we're going to reach out and get some help, or the struggle is going to deepen, it's going to worsen.
Take us out.
All right. Well, good evening to everyone. Thank you again, Bishop Debnam, for the opportunity, Dr. Carla Debnam for the opportunity, and I'm glad to share this medium with Pastor Thomas. I tried to approach this, and I'm sure my two pastors are going to really enjoy jumping on this. But when I thought about how to present this evening, there were two separate words that really took hold of me. One was healed, and the other was whole. Sometimes in our community, we think that once we're healed from something, that we're whole.
Wow.
Right? And so one of the questions that we kind of concentrated on tonight was trying to figure out how to convince men to come to the doctor, how important it is. And my focus led me to the fact that one visit to the doctor not only doesn't tell me what's wrong, but it doesn't tell me what's right. As a physician, we have the job to not only work with you to prevent disease from developing, but also to stop the progression of disease where it is as best we can. Pastor Thomas, in the morning, I do drug treatment with methadone, Suboxone, Subutex, Vivitrol, you name it. And one of the interesting statistics is that nationwide, we only have about a 20% success rate with drug treatment.
Wow.
Of that 20%, 80% of those patients have to do at least 2 years of mental health work to actually be successful and never come back. Success is going away and never coming back, and not just staying on that wheel. And they do the physical part, they do the mental health part, and most people don't understand that addiction is a mental health issue. 70% of addiction is mental health related. Only 30% of it is physical. I can send a patient down the street for 7 days and detox them off of any opiate, but if their mind ain't right, they're coming right back. So I'll just begin by saying being healed is not being whole.
Wow. Both of you made two good points that I want to pick up on. I like that be healed. Being healed doesn't mean you're whole. Dr. Thomas said something earlier I think is so crucial. Talked about being good stewards. Because oftentimes we think that being a good steward, if we take care of our money, we take care of our time, and we've tried that we've done all that we can. But stewardship also incorporates taking care of your body, and it was mentioned earlier, and our body, our mind, and our spirit. And so if we're going to be better stewards, or the best stewards possible, we have to be focused on taking care of the temple that God has given to us. And that includes mental health, emotional health, physical health, and yes, of course, our spiritual health. And so as we look at this tonight, and we would charge the brothers who are sharing with us tonight to be better stewards, what are some things, some ways that they can become better stewards of what the temple that God has given to them? And as you prepare to answer the question, both of you are, again, I'm inviting all our guests, brothers, make sure you text another brother tonight, tell him, hey, he has to be on this platform tonight. Email somebody, tweet somebody, holler through the house at somebody if they're in there with you. Say, listen, pay attention. You need to get this information. But so if we're going to be better stewards. What are some things that we need to make sure we're stewards over in guarding our body, our mind, our soul? And either one of you can jump in right there.
Well, I guess I'll go first this time. One of the most important things about being a good steward of your body is recognizing when something isn't right. Am I eating too much? Am I not eating enough? Am I sleeping too much? Am I not sleeping enough? What's going on with my sexual performance? All of these things are indicators that something may be going wrong in your body. And there's simple things that we pay no attention to. And so we don't try to change the way we steward ourselves or steward our abilities because we don't recognize that something is going wrong.
Yeah.
So knowing the symptoms, knowing you well enough to know this ain't me, something's not right. And once I know that, question becomes, what am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Am I willing to do something about what's not right? What do I expect it to just go away? Pastor Thomas?
Yeah, that is so important. As Dr. Durry was just sharing, paying attention to ourselves, right? To those kind of simple dynamics. I think that so often it seems that many of us are guilty of not paying attention, right? And so often, again, the messages we get from society about what men are supposed to do and how men are supposed to behave and how men are supposed to act can sometimes be barriers, right? So that, we'll think, well, I'm not supposed to notice when things are not the way I'm accustomed to them being in my body. I'm not supposed to notice it, and I'm certainly not supposed to say anything about it, right? So I think that that's where a lot of folks are. But I would add to that also just kind of noticing even our feelings. This is as it relates to mental health. There's a device that I recommend very often. It's called a feelings wheel.
Mm.
And you can Google it. There are so many examples of it. But a feelings wheel actually gives us language and a rubric to try to get more precise, even with how we're feeling, because sometimes our feelings are clues that something's going on with us. And if we can be, somewhat precise with how we're feeling. So maybe it's not simply just I'm angry. Maybe more precisely, maybe I'm frustrated. And if I am, then what am I frustrated about? And then kind of, digging a little bit there. And if we get to the place where we're not quite sure, but it is distressing us, then actually reaching out and getting some help. I love again just that whole idea of paying attention to those things. I was thinking of Dr. Durry about how even as it relates to protecting our mental health, that when we get enough sleep, that's a way of helping to protect our mental health. Obviously, making sure we're not getting too much sleep, but also making sure we're not getting too little sleep. That getting sleep, going without sufficient sleep over an extended period of time can actually contribute to psychosis. So, making sure we get enough sleep, making sure that we stay active, making sure that we find some healthy ways to de-stress and actually connecting with other people. Obviously, COVID affected that. And so, it created some barriers to us actually connecting with other people. And when we miss that, evidence shows that actually connecting with other people helps us to regulate our emotions. You know how it is, you're around certain people and they kind of help to bring some calm to you. If we're blessed, we have people we can call and or blessed to be around them, and just interacting with them helps to regulate our emotions. There have been all kinds of studies done and research shows it so. So if we go periods of time without those connections, it adversely affects our mental health.
So I just wanted to add, if you'd allow me to,
Mm-hmm.
word avoidance.
Mm.
One of the biggest issues is that we as human beings attempt to do the impossible. We try to avoid anger. We try to avoid disappointment. We try to avoid joy. We try to avoid any emotion at all, which is absolutely impossible. One of the realizations that I try to help my folks who suffer with addiction is, if you're mad before you get high, you're mad while you're high, and you're mad when you finish getting high. So you never avoided the emotion. There's no real such thing as being, I'll call it inhuman or inhumane. All of these emotions that we try to bury are a normal part of life. And so for us to attempt to avoid emotion is actually impossible.
Mhm.
Wow. Doctors, African American men grew up in an environment where you were taught that when you're angry or frustrated, you drink it out, you smoke it out, you sex it out. We were taught we don't talk about anything. We just try to figure it out. We man up and we figure it out. What do you say to a person who is still living with that mindset that you just man up and you handle everything, you smoke it out, you drink it out, you cuss it out, you sex it out, you lie it out, you ignore it? What do you tell somebody who's still dealing with that? How do we get them to move beyond that?
Be honest about the results.
Wow.
So be honest about where it's getting you. Be honest about what we've seen. When we get angry, and we should, and Dr. Durry is right, some things ought to make us angry, right? It's not about avoiding it.
Mm-hmm.
Anger avoidance can actually produce anxiety. And so it's not about avoiding it, it's about regulating it. And so when we don't regulate, when we fight it out, let's look at where it leads. When our anger explodes, we either end up in the hospital, in the morgue, in prison, or some other institution, or someone else that we're interacting with ends up there. So if that's how we've been socialized, you got a lot of guys saying, wow, I did it the way I was taught to do it. I fought it out, and now I'm doing a bid. So, we got to try a different way. Let's be honest about the results.
I think we also have to recognize that there are excuses and there are reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Some people who do what they do because they like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some people who do what they do because it's an end result of everything else that's happened. So sometimes I come upon addiction patients who just like the high feeling.
Wow.
But then I come upon people who've been molested or people who've been to prison and don't realize they have PTSD because they watched somebody get stabbed, watched somebody get raped, had to stab somebody themselves. And it's written that if you spend anything close to 18 months in prison, you have PTSD.
Wow.
So there are a lot of people who are trying to deal with what they've had to deal with their whole lives, and they've gone into a survival mode. Whatever I got to do to make it is what I'm going to do. And we're trying to break them out of a survival mode, take them back through the pain so that they can learn how to manage their life better. And so just the thought of having to deal with the reasons why we do what we do is enough to scare you to death.
Wow. Wow. There's some questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get to a couple of them. One of the questions is this, and we're dealing with making men whole. We want to be whole as men. We're tired of being incomplete. And we want to be as strong and as stable, as prosperous as we can be. And so to make that happen, we have to position ourselves to fulfill our roles. There's a question in the chat that says, how can you find the resources that align with our needs in the Black community? I mean, we're dealing with some men have never gotten proper primary care. Some men have never even thought about having a therapist. Some men don't think about self-care. So self-care for many Black men, again, it's a bottle, it's a joint, it's a line of Coke, it's multiple women. But how do we find proper resources to meet our needs?
Most of what I do on the medical side is usually secondary. I get you after you got high blood pressure. I get you most of the time after you've had some liver trouble, after you've had some kidney trouble, because that's the only time that young men who feel invincible will come to the doctor. So that's why I said I don't know when I first meet you what's right and what's wrong. And that's the way I try to get you used to coming to the doctor until we find everything that there is to be found. But ultimately, if your physical ain't right, your mental won't be right. And if your mental ain't right, your physical won't be right. So wholeness, and this is a problem in the medical community, actually. We don't interact enough with the psychological, psychiatric, therapeutic aspects of care. Because if I can get you de-stressed, I can get your blood pressure down much faster than I can if you're stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is the medical community itself is not interacting the way it should on the mental health with the mental health aspect of life. The other part of it is we feel invincible until a time that something actually goes wrong. And the third part of it is, in our community, Black men don't go to the doctor.
Wow. And just to push the button a little bit, all the resources in our community. For instance, we're talking to a Black medical doctor tonight, a Black therapist tonight, and sometimes we don't go perhaps because there's no one who looks like us.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing tonight, that may not be totally true. So has that been a barrier in the past?
An even larger barrier is what we think of ourselves.
Okay.
So if white is right,
wow,
then that's a barrier. Because if I tell you something and it requires you to get affirmation from someone that doesn't look like me for you to believe it and for you to follow it, the issue lies in the community and not necessarily in the resources.
Wow.
I agree. I think dovetailed along with that would be the sentiments of some who have in many instances, an informed, legitimate mistrust of the medical community, particularly if it is perpetuated or offered by some who don't look like us. That's those of us who may be informed, and so they will cite the Tuskegee experiments. They will cite Henrietta Lacks. They will cite those instances and use them as I guess as ways to try to legitimize their avoidance or their mistrust. I do believe that as it relates to particularly Black male therapists, to be honest, there are not a lot of us. There needs to be more. There needs to be more. That being said, some of us are here and trained and willing to help. And I would just encourage our folks to really see the need and to reach out. I love what Dr. Durry said about, for some it's an excuse, for others it's a reason in terms of their lived experiences. But I do think that we can play a role. If I can add this to it as well, our churches can play a major role in providing resources. So our churches end up being kind of storehouses in many ways of information and resources. So Morning Star is extremely blessed that you all have the Renaissance Center as well. So that when people come there, it's kind of a no-brainer. And you happen to have great people like Dr. Durry and others who you can also connect people to. I think other churches who may not have the same degree of medical professionals in their churches, they can still know. So like, for example, for the longest time, and it continues, if people come to our church and they're looking for a place to go to find therapy that also is sensitive to their faith, absolutely. The Renaissance Center is where I encourage them to go first place.
Well, and let me just put this plug in there since you mentioned Renaissance Center again. That Renaissance Center hosts these conversations on a monthly basis. Lady Carla is normally on at this time slot hosting our RC chat. She's given us men the privilege tonight to come and just have a dialogue. But you can reach the Renaissance Center any day at 410-409-0025. 410-409-0025. Because again, one of the things I shared with Morning Star many years ago from the pulpit was, I can't preach everything out of you. Some stuff has to be talked out of you. Therapist has to get it out of you. A medical doctor has to prescribe certain things for you. And we've got to work as a team. As Dr. Durry mentioned earlier, like the church partnering with mental health associations, partnering with a doctor's offices to make sure they're providing our community, and in this case, our men, the proper services to keep them healthy, to keep them focused, to keep them pressing toward the fulfillment of their potential. And so tonight we're having this conversation because our aim is for men to be whole, men to fulfill their proper role in our community, become who God really has assigned them to be. Now, there's another question in the chat that I want you all to give some insight on. Someone asked a question, and it's a question many persons have asked before and ask it on a regular basis. And it may sound simple to some, but it's very significant. The person's asking, how do I quit smoking?
All right, you or me?
You please.
So it's interesting. Most people who quit doing something started quitting before I ever met them. Right? So you, for the most part, you've made the decision, and now you have to make lifestyle changes that are consistent with that. So if being around people who smoke make you want to smoke, then you got to walk away. That's one thing. Medically, there are a couple of medications that we use that help with the oral fixation of smoking, but they don't stop you from smoking. The interesting thing about people who quit smoking is they hate the smell of smoke. So if you really believe you are ready to quit smoking, it'll be something that you'll detest it. You'll get to the point where it won't be hard to do. But that's after you've decided. You actually have to decide first. And then whatever you find are the reasons or the situations that put you in a mood for smoking, you have to work through those issues, make sure that you stay away from those issues until you are strong enough to not use it as a means of escape from whatever it is that's stressing you out.
Wow.
I agree. So it becomes an issue of the habit of smoking versus also the nicotine addiction. So it's, for many people, they may have to go and get some help. Many use the patch, many use other means like medically to help them. And then they might come and sit down and talk to a therapist and we'll work with them as it relates to triggers. So is it certain settings? Is it certain conditions, certain people? And to look at what role is the cigarette actually playing? Many people who started smoking socially. And then after a while, it was just tough to let it go. Interestingly enough, so the people that I see, at least 90% of them have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And in many instances, working with them, they're quick to tell me it was tougher for them to stop smoking cigarettes than it was with some of the other substances that they've been using. And then we dialogue about it. And I think in many instances, it's just because after, for them, perhaps reaching a place where they're substance free, or they they've reduced their use significantly, that the cigarette is just one more thing to help them when they feel anxious. So they think. And so then we have to work on other coping skills that they can use to address the anxiety without actually smoking.
Wow. I want to turn the corner just for a second, because Pastor Thomas, Dr. Durry, we're seeing in our community an unusual amount of violence. It's just getting, you can't read the newspaper, stream internet without hearing about something else crazy happening. We're seeing an unusual amount of violence, crime, suicide is increasing in our community. There was a time when suicide in the African-American community was virtually non-existent. But now we're seeing it happen over and over again. Well, are these mental problems? Are they physical problems? How do we address this uptick and that's impacting us and impacting our men, our men, the health, the violence, the crime, the suicide? What do we say? What do we say to our brothers who are experiencing all of this?
So I mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
Alvin Poussant did a study. I believe it was out of Morehouse School of Medicine. It had to be 20 years ago, where he was trying to figure out why all of our kids were being put on medication for ADHD. And what he found in his study was that the kids were suffering more from PTSD than ADHD. They had to walk home from school, seeing drugs, seeing prostitutes, seeing yellow tape up.
Wow.
Getting home, nobody there. Mom's either working or just out. Dad's in jail, brothers in jail, uncles in jail. Nobody there to help them with homework, got to cook for themselves. So they found that it was more of a post-traumatic stress disorder. And these kids don't even realize that they're affected by it. So then they tend to try to stop feeling. They don't want to feel anything. So then life becomes less important to them, whether they live or die. So it's almost, I'll just call it a loss of hope, and I'll pass the torch.
Yes, I agree. It's trauma. It is. I believe that we are more and more becoming a traumatized society. And I'm convinced that books will be written in the future about how the trauma was impacted, maybe even exacerbated during the pandemic. So I mentioned earlier that studies have shown that interacting with others, socializing, actually helps to regulate our emotions. That to spend 3 years for a lot of people without that, already having been heavily traumatized, and trauma, when we're exposed to it over long periods of time, it just becomes a way of attempting to function. It just becomes a way of life. And so we stay in that part of the brain that comprises the nervous system, in particular, the part of the brain where we find fight or flight, freeze or fawn. And I think that what we're seeing in terms of the uptick in violence is just a lot of folks who are suffering from PTSD, who are heavily traumatized, who are just trying to survive. Many people are just afraid. And so out of that sense of fight or flight, the first instinct is to fight. So is this something that I can fight my way through? If one concludes, no, it's not something I can fight my way out of or through, then comes the flight. But there's some who conclude, I can't run from this. And so they may freeze. And a lot of folks aren't accustomed or unaware of the fawn, piece. Fawning is just kind of diminishing. It's people pleasing. And so when you find children who grew up in settings, maybe even homes where there was a lot of trauma, they learned how to attempt to appease like an abuser. And so for many of them growing up, that becomes their way of dealing with things that make them afraid. They just try to please everybody. If I can just please them, they won't hurt me. I won't be vulnerable. And so, but it's a trauma response in many instances. And so I do believe that our young people, a lot of our young men have been, to grow up, it's been said, to grow up in Baltimore is to be traumatized.
Wow.
Even more so to grow up as a Black person is to be traumatized. And if we really take that seriously, we've got to do something about the severe levels of trauma in our society.
Yeah, that is so good. And one of you used the term traumatized society. And it's impacting us physically, it impacts us mentally, emotionally, and it impacts us spiritually. And so when as we recognize that we are dealing with so much trauma, you mentioned how young men, a young person, they walk home from school, they see yellow tape, they see needles in the street, they hear gunshots at night, they hear their parents arguing throughout the night. Parent may have left them alone with the other parent. Trauma. And so they grow up with this stuff in them, not knowing how to properly address it, how to deal with it. And so and it impacts us. We have to figure out ways to handle it. That's a question that I want you all to really answer and again to remind our persons of sharing with us on virtual platforms. If you have questions, write them in the chat. We're going to do our best to get to as many of them as possible. But there's a question, Pastor Thomas, Dr. Durry, I think we need to wrestle with for a moment, because they are wives on tonight, their daughters on tonight, mothers on tonight, sisters on tonight, who have men in their lives who are dealing with the trauma, who are dealing with the pain, who are dealing with the frustration, the anxiety. How can family and friends help men be whole? What's the role of family and friends? How can they help men to become more whole?
I would say in many instances, by first becoming whole themselves. And in doing so, I would say along with it, or perhaps even afterwards, just be supportive. Be supportive of that man. Let him know that you're there, that you see him, and be a safe space for him to talk. So men often get criticized or critiqued for not having feelings or emotions. Men do have feelings.
Right.
Men have emotions. They may not always express them in ways that make it clear how they're feeling, but we do feel them. And often we're hesitant. I talked about earlier the feeling wheel, that sometimes we just don't have language for some of them. But if we feel like we're in a safe space, often, a man will share those feelings, those emotions. If he feels like he's going to be judged, if he feels like he's going to be critiqued for expressing how he feels, he's not going to share them. So providing a safe space for him to do that, and then encouraging, not harassing, but encouraging one to get some help as well, depending on the level of which they need it, encouraging them to get help as well. Just some tips that quickly come to mind.
I love it.
Well, I think you can love someone unconditionally, but still hold them accountable. One of the things that we tend to do is we go beyond compassion and become dispassionate, to a point where they think you're just always going to understand that they felt they had to do what they had to do. And there has to come a time where you say, well, I get it, but I can't keep getting it. Like something actually has to change in the way we do this, or we're never going to be successful. I service a lot of men who come out of jail. A lot of them used to sell drugs. And one of the biggest frustrations that they have is trying to reestablish the lifestyle that they were living when they were selling drugs.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have more than one child, more than one baby's mother. And all of those, and the uncles and aunts and cousins who were also living off of them. And we expect them to come out and work at Burger King when they used to buy red bottom shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so there's a major stress that they feel the minute they get back into the community, because even though they want to live right, the situation is such that the expectations are so great for them that they end up falling back into the life before to live up to everybody else's standard, despite their wanting to change. So I think we can love unconditionally, but we can't go beyond compassion and become dispassionate, where we accept everything we could just because of what they've been through. We still have to hold people accountable, but we also have to understand that things have changed. And so what we expected them to do before, we can't expect them to do now if we expect them to change.
This is so helpful, so impactful. Again, we encourage you, if you know some brotherhood, make sure they're hearing this conversation tonight. Don't forget our Renaissance Center, 410-409-0025. If you need some support there, 410-409-0025. There's another question I want to hear some your responses to tonight. And it's in the chat. Brother he's asking this question. He says, how do I find adequate help that can relate to me as a 62-year-old Black man that came from the streets and drugs? How can I find adequate help that can relate to me as a 62-year-old Black man that came from the streets and drugs? And I think you all have alluded to some of that response already, but if you add a little bit more.
Well, Dr. Thomas, I guess that prompts a question from me to you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them to trust you?
So building rapport and that therapeutic relationship, that rapport building is, if not the most important factor, it's definitely one of the most important factors in helping to position the person to get help. So one of the places where I provided mental health services was on 25th and Greenmount. And it happens to be just blocks away from where I grew up. So I grew up in East Baltimore. I grew up on 23rd Street, just a block off of Greenmount Avenue. And so some of the guys that would come through there, they knew me. Others, in fact, one happened to tell me, he said, in a group setting, he said that someone else in the lobby saw me come out. They didn't know me. And they said, okay, this guy's probably like this bookworm that did everything right, that can't relate to our struggle, to our context. And someone else in that setting spoke up and said, no, not him. So yeah, he was serious about his studies, but he grew up right here. He played basketball at Greenmount Rec, played football with us right there. No, he's from around here. That gave me almost instant credibility with some of the other guys. So they began to open up because they saw that we shared a place of upbringing, and that they know to grow up around there, it's impossible to grow up around there and not in some way have some kind of interactions with all of the stuff that goes on around that. So I think building rapport though. So just in some of those conversations that I would be intentional about building rapport. To the person who asked the question, I would say, obviously, you want to try to research or find a therapist, who might have some same shared experiences, maybe at the very least, who looks like you. And I know several other therapists who work in similar settings who get it. Listening to Dr. Durry talk about his understanding of brothers who are returning citizens and the pressure on them to return to the game. I mean, that's somebody who gets it. Yeah. He understands. And so I think that would be phenomenal, for someone in his 60s. I get what he's saying. He's saying he's old school. He grew up in the streets. He matriculated in the University of Adversity. And he wants someone who understands the nuances associated with that. And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's a bad expectation. Just take some intentionality in terms of researching.
Wow. I think patients also need to know, or anyone interested, that sometimes the first therapist doesn't work.
I agree.
And you can't stop with the first one because the first one didn't work. That's a very common excuse why people won't go back to therapy, because the first experience they had wasn't what they expected it to be. The second part of that is, if you've lived 62 years, you got a lot of work to do to work through all of the stuff that you want to work through. So you also have to be patient with you. Right? Because you're not going to solve all of that in 6 months, 1 year. It takes time to work through, because there's some things you've forgotten that are buried deep inside of you that are going to come out. And when they come out, you're going to need some guidance to say, let's stop right here today. This is enough for today. I know you all have seen Antoine Fisher before, where he just wanted to keep going and keep going.
Yes.
And Denzel said, nope, we got to stop right here for today because it's too painful. Like a person doesn't even know their own triggers. You could be walking through Walmart and smell your grandmother's perfume and it's a trigger. So not knowing your own triggers and working through your own issues, you're going to find out things about yourself that you didn't even realize. I tell the story often. It's very brief. There was a young man who he's now 42 years old. When he was a child, his mom and dad, the first 7 years of his life, did everything together. All of his sports events, all of his church events, they go get ice cream. His remembrance was, we would go home right after the ice cream and I go to bed. And then right around 10 years of age, his mom and dad got a divorce. Yet father was still active. He still came to every event. They went and got ice cream, but dad went to his place. Mom went to her place. Then dad remarried when he turned 11 and mom started dogging dad. And your daddy didn't do this, your daddy didn't do that. And the father was still trying to be present. But now the young man built up animosity against his father because of all the things he was hearing. The father had 2 more children by his age 13. And now he had to share his dad with other kids, right? And so by age 16, when he got a little independence in his life, he then found out that his mom was actually the one who destroyed the marriage. So he grew up hating his dad, then learned to hate his mom. Now he's independent and he goes out and starts using drugs. And now he's 42 and still struggling with heroin, not really recognizing until maybe a year ago that what some people think is small is very big. A divorce for some people is big. A father having another child, having to share father, it's big. All of these things that we discount that we bury are things that still affect us 20 years later. So for the gentleman who asked the question, just understand that there's going to be a lot that goes into you feeling whole, and it's going to take some time.
Wow, this is
Amen.
so. I want to get to. I know our time is yes, but I want you to answer this question. So I think your question, I think, is so crucial. And the question is from a gentleman. He says, "I lost my wife 2 years ago, and my brother 5 months later, and I've been dealing with depression since then. How do I get past my depression?" Dr. Thomas, I guess this was, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of loss, and every loss requires whatever appropriate is for that person, an appropriate season of grief. Every loss, and obviously, we don't all grieve the same. It's a process. I would suggest that most people that I know, having experienced that much loss, would most likely need some help to grieve through that, to address the symptoms of depression, and also. But I would, for me, if I was treating someone who had dealt with that much loss and was experiencing some symptoms of depression, I would certainly address the symptoms of depression. But the first thing that I would treat and address would be the grief.
Wow.
And just helping him to know that, it sucks. It hurts. It's painful. And that to grieve doesn't mean, again, that he's not strong. And I've come to really, it's almost like chalk on the chalkboard when I hear someone say to someone who's experienced loss and they're grieving, somebody tell them, look, just be strong.
Right.
Man, it's almost like, because I don't know what that looks like.
Me either.
I don't know what does that look like? What does being strong look like in the face of that? Being strong could look like someone crying a lot. Could be strength for them. So I would address the grief, and I would encourage you to seek help. Find someone that can work with you through that, acknowledge it, and be patient. Be patient with yourself through the process as well. This is not something, in my opinion, losing someone is not something you get over. It's not something, just build a bridge and get over it. No, that's extremely overly simplistic. It's more like, with help and a whole lot of grace, you grow to a place prayerfully of integrating the fact that the persons are no longer here with you also moving on and living your life. And I know those words flow easily from my lips, but it takes some work to get there.
Whole lot of work.
Yeah.
I know we're running over. Lady Carla's gonna get me because I'm running over our time tonight. She may not invite us back on because I'm running over my time. But let me share a few quick things. I'm gonna let you all go because this has been this impactful, I think helpful to so many men, so many persons who are going through these seasons of life. Our aim in this season, when it starts, is for men to be strong, men to be faithful, men to be able to fulfill God's ultimate role, plan for their lives, live to their potential. And it's all about being whole. We had our barbershop conversations, 4 weeks of them when men gathered on Saturday morning, 150 men on those four Saturday mornings, just having conversation, having talk, dialogue, and we continue it now. We'll pick that up next month. But just wanted the men, we're not going to leave you hanging. We're going to continue the conversation with you to let you know that God does have a powerful plan for you and a path for you to get there. And it's all about you being mentally whole, emotionally whole, physically whole, and of course, spiritually whole at the same time. Let me share these final words with you, and we'll prepare to close out. Sunday is Brother Sunday, Men's Day, 7:15, 9:15, 11:30. We'll be sharing all day long. Then, of course, 6 o'clock Sunday, Men in Prayer. What happens when men pray? Sunday is 6 o'clock. Thursday of this week, course, we have our men's fish fry tomorrow, Wednesday, noonday and 6:30, special Bible study, man after God's own heart. We want to empower, encourage, and strengthen our brothers. Don't forget, Renaissance Center. They can be assistants to you, 410-409-0025. Even if you want to be, since they're blessed in you, many persons feel led to be a financial blessing to our Renaissance Center also. I encourage you to do so. Go to one of our online platforms, Givelify, Text to Give, Cash App, and Fellowship. Be a blessing to our Renaissance Center for the work that they do, consistent work that they do. Lady Carla served the Renaissance Center for the last 25 years or so, almost 25 years. We thank God for the work they do every day, empowering our community. We do not take lightly them, our Renaissance Center team and staff, our executive director, Dr. Carla J. Debnam, she gave us this platform tonight to share with just the men. Pastor Dr. Reginald Thomas, Dr. Michael Durry, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. I know that there's some that they in the chats that they're applauding you, they're thanking you, they're celebrating you because you've been a wealth of information tonight. Just if you all can take about 20, 30 seconds apiece, give some closing words, then we'll close out.
Well, I'm gonna let the pastor get a benediction. I'll leave you with one thought. My feeling about just about everything we've talked about tonight is that wholeness requires submission.
Mm-hmm.
You have to submit to the Spirit if you want to be whole spiritually. You have to submit to the guidance of your therapist or your doctor if you want to be whole physically and mentally. So my push is for us to learn how to submit in an effort to be whole.
That's good.
Amen. I'll leave us with this thought that challenges me often. If you don't make time for your wellness, you'll be forced to take time for your illness.
Wow. That's so good. That's so good. Thank you all so much. Those who shared with us on our virtual platforms tonight, thank you for tuning in tonight. We look forward to continuing the conversation. We'll have another barbershop conversation in the month of July, bringing the men together just to talk, and maybe we'll pick up on this thing with Dr. Durry and Dr. Thomas, just to have some conversation about where we are mentally and physically. Well, be blessed tonight. Don't forget to join us tomorrow morning for our prayer call, 6 a.m. Of course, we'll share God's word, 12 noon, virtual and in person tomorrow, then 6:30, virtual only. Be blessed. Thank you all for sharing.